A while back, I was tuning my rack tom, and I was trying to get more resonance and more tone out of it. However, it continued to sound lifeless no matter how hard I tried to get both of the heads tuned just right. You know, sometimes a dead sound is cool, but you always want to have the option of a full, longer tone too. I really wasn't getting that full, longer tone I desired because this just wasn't cutting it. But then I made an interesting discovery that changed everything. I've always been a fan of setting my tom in a basket stand rather than mounting it off the kick or the cymbal stand, because that allows me to more easily place it exactly where I want it. What I realized though was that my basket stand was essentially sucking the life out of the drum, not letting it resonate. And honestly, this was understandable because there's so much contact between a basket stand and the drum that's in it. So of course it's going to deaden it a little bit. But when I decided to switch out stands, things got interesting. Here's what I learned. Not all stands are created equal. Though all basket stands might work great for a snare drum, some work great and some work horribly for a rack tom. I found that the stand I'd been using was indeed the horrible stand. So I switched it out for another one I had lying around, and suddenly the drum sounded amazing. I'll show you how I landed on the stand I'm using now, and you'll see what the key component is that you want to look for in a tom-worthy basket stand. This will be pretty interesting, so here we go. Now, before we compare stands, we need to address something else, because if you have your rack tom mounted off of the kick or off of a cymbal stand, but it's still not sounding very good and it's still not resonating the way you want it to, then obviously your solution is not a better basket stand. It has to do with tuning. So let's talk about that a little first before we start comparing stands. So first thing is, don't tune your top head too high if you're trying to get that deep resonant sound. I know that sounds kind of obvious, but a lot of times if you've got your top head tuned low, there's not going to be a whole lot of resonance and tone unless you get the bottom head where it needs to be. So a lot of times it's okay to have that top head loose, because that's where you're getting a lot of that depth and a lot of just that body from. So start by tuning that top head maybe a little lower than you think it ought to go, because you can always bring it back up. So start off with it low and then tune the bottom head up to find that sweet spot. Keep tuning until you find the sweet spot where you get the right amount of tone, because you're gonna have to find that relationship between, okay, we've got the top head kind of where we want it, where it feels right, but we've got to get the bottom head tuned high enough that we have tone, but not so high that it chokes out, because eventually you start to lose the tone if there's too much of a difference in those head tensions. So you just have to play with it. There's no one right answer here. Then my advice is don't muffle at all. Unless, of course, I say that, and you might be able to see this piece of tape here. Unless you've just got a tiny piece of moon gel or a tiny piece of gaff tape on there, just to get rid of sympathetic resonance. I have this little piece of tape on both my rack tom and my floor tom just to get rid of that sympathetic buzzing, just that little bit of ringing when I hit the kick or the snare. I've played around with getting rid of that by tuning, but it's easier, honestly, just to throw a little bit of tape on there. That's totally fine. And it doesn't really make much difference in the sound of the drum. It just cleans up the overall kit sound. But now let's listen real quick to what this drum sounds like, just so you can hear what the tuning I've described sounds like. One other side note before we do the stand comparison, keep in mind that a lower tuned drum is gonna vibrate more, or vibrate further over a larger amount of space than a higher tuned drum. If that doesn't make sense, think about a speaker. If you've got like a speaker set up and it's playing a high sound, you could put your hand on it and you're not going to feel a lot of the vibration if the frequency is really high. But if that speaker's playing a low sound, you put your hand on it and you feel the vibration, you feel all the rumble of that low end. And that's because those lower frequency vibrations are more apparent. And it's the same way with a drum, where if you've got your rack tom tuned really high, or it's a really small rack tom, it might not matter what basket stand you have it in, because it doesn't require as much space to resonate. But if you've got the drum tuned lower, you need more of that space. It needs to be more isolated and able to resonate freely to really take advantage of all of that low end. Otherwise, you lose some of that low end because the drum isn't able to actually resonate. So just something to keep in mind based on how you're tuning your drums. All right, so on to the stand comparison. So we've got a few stands here. And this first one, this is actually my snare stand. And it's very similar to a stand that I was at one point using for my rack tom. This is basically the horrible stand. This one in particular isn't horrible, but it's the worst out of all three of these. And the reason why, this is a super stiff, heavy duty stand, really well built. It's a great stand, DW 3000 series. and it's great for my snare. And actually, when I put the rack tom in this, it still sounds okay, but we lose some of that resonance. We lose some of that thickness, that fullness, that body of the sound because it's such a stiff stand. And so when you clamp this onto there, or even when the drum is just sitting on here, because it's so stiff and heavy and there's not any room for flexing, we lose a lot of tone. Now the next stand here, it's also a DW. This is the DW 6000 series lightweight stand. These are really cool. I bought a set of these a few months ago. The lightweight hardware, DW did a great job with these. This is not an official endorsement, but I definitely could recommend you get these because they're so lightweight. They fold up even more tight. They're super portable. And so these have been really great to have around. And it happens that because it's such a lightweight stand, it actually allows for more resonance from the drum that's on said stand. These aren't cheap in any way. Like, these are great quality stands, super sturdy, but they're lightweight and they're a little more flexible than the 3000 series. And so I can put my rack tom in this and it actually resonates better. And some of that is probably thanks to the design here where we actually have an isolated drum clamp here on the ends of the arms. That's the way they designed this stand, which is really great. I think that makes a lot of difference. So you'll really hear the difference here between this stand and the DW 3000. But here's the funny thing. I also have this stand. This is a really old, really cheap stand. I bought this when I was 12 years old, along with the first drum that I ever bought. I bought a little piccolo snare drum, bought this stand to put it in. Super cheap. I probably wouldn't take it on a gig. I mean, it's gonna hold up. It's not gonna fall apart or anything, but I just don't like this kind of stand. It's kind of flimsy and rickety. But because it's thin, flimsy, and rickety, it's also super flexible as a result. And so when you put a tom on this, it's as if the tom is just suspended in midair. It just resonates as if there was nothing stopping it. And it sounds really cool. Thanks everyone for watching. If you found this video interesting, and most importantly, if it helped you out and provided you with valuable info, be sure to subscribe before you go. And also check out this free e-guide. It's my gift to you, totally free. Go grab that, go download that. Thanks everyone again for watching. Stay non-glamorous.